So what happens to a little girl from North Dakota who loses her grandmother and father and is raped all in a short period of time? The mother doesn't take action, and then she gets raped again by the same people years later. All this and more in this episode of the Remarkable People Podcast.
The Remarkable People Podcast. Check it out. The Remarkable People Podcast. Listen, do, repeat. For life.
Hello, friends. Welcome to the Remarkable People Podcast. This week is a very sensitive episode. Our guest talks about dealing with grief. And whenever you're dealing with grief, whether it's the loss of a loved one, whether it's abandonment, the loss of that emotional connection, whether it's rape, losing your purity, and so many other reasons you can have grief in your life. This guest has had many of the grief sources, and she not only went through the darkness, but she emerged into the light. So get your pens and paper ready. Make sure that you're open to listen. Be there to share this episode with your friends and family who are suffering, so we can all have just freedom and joy and peace together. Our guest is going to talk about, like we said in the pre-roll, losing her grandmother, losing her father, being raped, her mom not acting on it, staying friends with the individuals. They raped her again. It was a terrible situation for her and her family. She goes into alcoholism, but she meets her knight in shining armor, and together, between God and her husband and herself, she emerges through a grief recovery program. And she gives us steps of not just how she did it, but we can too. So get ready for this remarkable episode, the Victoria Volk story, now. Hey, Victoria, how are you today?
It's an awesome day. I'm great.
It is. And it's been great talking to you in our pre-call information, just getting to know each other a bit. I just gave a breakdown and an intro to your story, and our listeners are ready to go. So at this time, if you can just share your journey with us, we'll start with birth. Where were you born? What was your upbringing like? You know, the good, the bad, and the ugly, because that forms who we are today. It helps influence it. And then we'll just go step by step from adolescence to adulthood to today. And then we'll transition to, well, now you helped us for an hour. Victoria, how can we help you? And then we'll transition to where you're going and how we can help you get there. So you ready to go?
I'm ready.
Awesome. Let's do this. So where were you born and what was your upbringing like?
I was born in Wishick, North Dakota, and I lived there until I graduated. I graduated when I was 18. And so I was born and raised, and it's a small town. Like back then it was maybe 1,300 people. Now it's more like 800. But, you know, it's a place where, you know, growing up in the 80s in a small town, you didn't lock your doors, you rode bike into the night, ran to the neighbor's house or to your friend's place. You know, it was the freedom that I think a lot of kids today just don't experience or get, you know, just growing up in a small town. And so I loved it. I loved the town in which I lived, but there was a lot going on in my personal life that has really shaped the work that I'm doing today. And when I was about 6, 7, my grandmother was she had melanoma, and she was living with us for a time while she was sick. And at the same time then, or shortly thereafter, we had found out my dad had stage 4 colon cancer. And so she was living with us at the same time as my dad was sick, and she ended up passing away when I was 7. And then a year later, my father had passed away. So
sorry to hear that.
Yeah. And, you know, I can talk about it today and not be a mess on the floor, because I've really processed a lot of that. I have processed that. But at the time, being a child and the youngest of 4 kids, I was kind of that's really, I think, when I became more, I internalized everything. There wasn't a lot of, my mom had lost her mom and her husband in a short amount of time, and there just wasn't room for my grief. She had endured and lost a lot, and she just didn't know how to help me. And I think just even back then, and even still today as adults, we just really don't know how to talk about grief with our children. And she did what she knew, and we always resort to what we know. And so it really was. And here's the thing too, like, I'm a highly sensitive person as an adult, and I didn't really understand that until probably like 3 years ago, where my childhood just started to make a whole lot of sense. My mom had actually remarried. Well, within a year she was dating somebody, and then within 2 years she was remarried. But also during that time, I had been molested by someone, and then a few years later again. And so there was just a lot of trauma and grief. My sister, she's 9 years older than me, and she was like a second mom. And after my dad passed away, she was in high school, or she was graduating. And so she moved, she left, she joined the Air Force. And so I lost my grandma, I lost my dad, I lost my sister, and I was molested. So a lot of change and trauma in a
And I
very
was going to
short
ask
amount
you
of time.
that in your family. So was your older sister, 9-year older sister, then you? So there's only 2 of you?
No, there's 4 of us. I have an older brother, a brother that's older than her, a half brother, and then her, and then my other brother, and then myself. And my brother is 5 years older than me. So he would have been about 14 at the time our dad passed away, and I was 8. And my sister
Okay.
was 18.
So
19.
everybody's trying to adjust. Everybody's trying to find their balance and be whole again. You're kind of lost in the shuffle, if I'm hearing correctly.
Yeah, pretty much.
And then the molestation, was it someone you knew, like a family member, a close friend? Was it a complete stranger?
It was someone the family knew, because actually when my mom remarried, he was a long haul trucker, and she would travel with him. And so I would be put in the care of, this family. And it was during those times, because my brother would have been 15, 14, 15, 16. He had a job, he was kind of doing his own thing. And the last thing he wanted to do was babysit his baby sister. So yeah, I was left to stay at the neighbors, or stay with a friend, or stay with this family. And yeah, there's there's actually, okay, so there's actually a murder mystery in my community that involves that family. Not a murder mystery, it's actually missing persons, but we all believe that they've been murdered. But anyway, they're tied. This young woman at the time was actually a sister to this person. And that's a way different story. But just to give an idea of this family, it was very disturbed family. And so really it really caused a lot of, when I was like 14, I told my mom what had happened to me. And it was kind of just this indifference of a response. She actually continued to be friends with this family.
Did
But
she not
again,
believe you, or was she in denial?
I don't know, honestly. My mom is still living, and so I don't.
You have to be careful how you
Yeah,
approach
this is
it.
really the first time I'm really even mentioning this much stuff, but this is where grief is really complicated, right? Because
Yeah.
sometimes it's the people that are closest to us that hurt us the most. It caused me to have a lot of anger and resentment towards my mother, because there just wasn't room for me. There wasn't room for my emotions. There wasn't room for what was happening to me. And my mom she's very extroverted. She's very much the opposite of me. She well, I became her therapist. She, a lot of what she was experiencing and the trouble she was having, she would share with me, like her child, and so there just wasn't room for me. And so and being a highly sensitive child, I did cry a lot, and a lot of things upset me because I felt things very deeply. And then to be told you're a crybaby, or if you want to cry, I'll give you something to cry about, which is often what children hear. I often found myself running under my bed, crying myself to sleep, or in the linen closet. One time they had to send out a search party for me, and I think that time I was in the linen closet, but in the kitchen cupboard. Like, I would just find places to hide, to cry and fall asleep because I just could not express myself outwardly. And when I did, and if it was angry emotion, then that was bad too. So I very much became someone who was internally just angry and felt like a victim, but couldn't express it, who was a victim, not just felt like it, but was a victim. And just, I grew up very angry, internally angry, and with that anger that had nowhere to go. And so I did manage somehow to not take a different path in my life. To this day, I still wonder how, because I had one of my best friends. She had different experiences in her life, with divorce and things, and she took a different path. And that's one thing that just makes me wonder about the human condition, how some people can choose one path and other people can choose a different path. And you can have traumatic and terrible things happen, but it just the way the human spirit, I guess, copes.
Sometimes you even have a family where the kids experience the same thing, even twins, and it's documented they have totally different reactions. So we all have that unique relationship and personality and character that God gave us. So it's just what's going to happen is different. It's unique to us. So if you don't mind, let me ask you some questions. So you were 9 when you first got molested. And then did you go back and the same people molested you, or is that a different part of your story? Okay. So your mom stayed with these people. Now, you obviously as a child didn't think about this, but what was happening is the person who should have been caring for you and protecting you, that individual is not. And in a way, it makes you angry because you should be protecting me. You're not. So now you have this internal anger, then you feel guilt and you feel shame. And I'm sure you had a million things going on that you weren't even understanding or aware of. It's even hard to break down now as adults, right? But typically I've seen people who go through that, they end up developing a hyper approval seeking from that parent. Did that happen in your relationship with your mom, where you were always trying to please her? You're always trying to win her to love you, to take care of you?
Absolutely. I never wanted to rock the boat. And even I was very much a people pleaser. And when I got my driver's license at 14, and we lived in a small town. And so driving to a big city, I had no clue. Like, there was no GPS and no cell phones back then. And I told my kids, even I have 2 licensed drivers now. And it's like, can you imagine driving in this city now? Like, even back then, though, I said, without a GPS, without knowing where to go, like, how did I do that? I have no idea, because my mom did not drive. She didn't have a driver's license. She never has. And so it didn't matter what my plans were. Her plans always trumped mine. So she wanted to go to the big city. You bet I was driving her. So the caveat of that was, well, you get use of the car. Okay, well, I guess I do, but I had started at 14, I got my first job too. And so it was my goal to not have to depend on anybody else. Yeah, so I became very independent. And I think I just had to be, because my mom would then travel with her spouse. And so I would be left home alone. And again, my brother was older, so he was kind of off doing his own thing. So I was a latchkey kid. My mom, when she was home, she worked until into the evening. And so she wasn't even home like at supper time. So it was always fend for yourself type of environment. And so it was just an environment that I had to be independent. I had to figure things out on my own. And I'm actually really grateful for that, because that's really served me well into adulthood, because I know, like, it's like Marie Forleo's quote, everything is figureoutable. I absolutely live that. And I absolutely truly believe that as well. Everything is figureoutable. If there's something that you want to learn how to do, or learn how to whether it's software or how to cook something, like, there's a way to figure it out. So yeah, I mean,
So now you're at this point in life. Did you share with anyone that you were raped or molested, or were you afraid to? Did you have a friend, a brother or sister? Did anybody know, or was it just a private secret?
as a teenager, I had told my mom. I was 14 at the time, and I had told her, and there was this sense of indifference. I don't know if I didn't get a sense that she didn't believe me, but her actions didn't show that she cared in a way, because she still kept in contact with the family. And perhaps she was the type too that didn't want to rock the boat. She didn't want to make waves or anything. And so I don't even believe she confronted that family at all. And here's the thing, like, this, to those listening, it's like, boy, your mom sounds like quite a winner, but my mom is still in my life. She's still living. She's going to be 79 years old. She still works, and she is feisty as ever. And she had her own trauma growing up and as an adult. And I just have really gotten to a place now of forgiveness, and finding grief recovery honestly was the thing that helped me cope with all of the anger and the resentment and everything that I had been storing in my body since a child, towards the anger I had towards God for, like, taking my dad away from me, the anger I had towards my mother for not being the mother I needed her to be, towards my offender. I had a lot of reasons to be angry, and it wasn't serving me well. And even into adulthood, I found alcohol as my soother. And that led me to only more grief, because I found myself in really dangerous situations. And sometimes I sit back and I wonder, it's like, geez, I'm surprised I'm even sitting here having this conversation with you, because there were so many more times than I wish I could say that I wish I would have made a different choice, made a different decision. But you can't turn back time. You can't go back and do things differently, but I can change how I feel about it moving forward. And that's what grief recovery helped me do in my relationship with my mom, in my relationship towards the offender, who I have forgiven. I have forgiven my mom, and it's the only reason why I'm still able to have her in my life. The thing we want to be careful of, as when we feel like a victim and we feel victimized, that's a really lonely place to be. And that's where I was for a long time. And I was not processing my emotions. I had big emotions. I still do. I'm highly sensitive. So I have big emotions, and I just didn't know how to handle them. I didn't know what to do with them. And so, yeah, so we tend to cope in whatever ways that we find work for us. And usually they're unhealthy ways. But what I want to share with the people listening is that we can villainize people, or actually in grief recovery, it's either called enshrinement or bedevilment. And I didn't want to, it could be really easy for me to bedevil my mom, right? It could be really easy for me to just tear her apart on this podcast. And I know for some it might sound that way, but this is my truth. And this is, what happened. And that is the truth. But
yeah, and I agree and I support you completely, because if someone's listening, anybody with a pure heart and mind knows you're not condemning your mother. You're just telling your story.
yes.
But I've been around people close to me, and me and everybody in the room heard a story being told, and it's just life. And that person came to reconciliation. But the one person who was watching is like, they're so self-righteous, they're so condemning. And I'm like, whoa, you got some baggage to take care of. I'm like, if you interpreted that way, and none of us even came close to that interpretation, I know you're carrying that same baggage, and they would not talk about it. So if you're listening now and Victoria's saying anything that's stirring you up, whether it's memory or repressed, you got some baggage you need to carry, let go and stop carrying. Is that safe to say, Victoria? I don't want to put words in your mouth.
No, it is. But and the opposite of that, like, you can have somebody that it doesn't matter what they say or do to you, you're never going to see it for what it truly is. You're never going to see it as having an impact on you. You're going to enshrine them. It's like, no matter what that person says or does, they are the best thing since sliced bread. That's enshrinement.
Mm-hmm.
It's when someone you love close to you or whatever does something to you, but you interpret it as, well, they didn't mean it, or they're just, it's like nothing. That's also denying what that person did to you.
Yeah. And that's what I was
denying the
asking you.
truth.
That's what I
Yes.
was asking you a few minutes ago about your mother. I've seen people go through similar things you did, and they were always seeking the approval. The mother could do no wrong. And that mother was not your mother, but that mother was a terrible
Mhm.
human and did terrible things. And this person could not accept. They just wanted to win their mother's love and approval, and they couldn't accept that their mother did bad things. Everything was, like you said, enshrinement.
Yep. Yep. And that's a slippery slope too, because that's not really processing either what's happened, and,
Yeah.
letting the emotion like pass through you. And, when you said about letting go, it's like people say, well, yeah, you just need to let go. I actually have a tattoo, let go, let God.
Yeah.
That was before I discovered grief recovery, because people say it's like, I wanted to let go.
But
wanted
how?
to give it to, but how do you do it? Right.
I want to punch those people in the face because they've never had to let go of anything. Because there is a process of letting go, and I hope we're going to get to it. I want to finish your story, and then we'll
Yes.
tie into how you healed. But if you're listening and you've been frustrated and felt bad about yourself because you don't know how to let go, Victoria, you even got a tattoo, but you finally figured it out, right?
Yeah. And really it starts with me, and it starts with you listening. That's where it has to start.
Yeah.
Because
So let's
you
do
can,
this.
okay.
Oh, go ahead. No, finish the sentence.
Yeah,
and
you
then we'll-
you can wait for an apology you'll never get, and you're just going to be stuck in emotional prison.
Yes.
And you can be resentful of that person, and that's just poison you take, hoping they die.
So let's do this before we get to the steps of healing. Let's finish your story, and it may all intertwine. Usually it does, right?
Mhm.
But so now you're a teenager. You have already been raped by this individual, and then now you said it actually happened again. So what happened at that point in your life, and then work us through the story.
Yeah, it was the times that I remember are 9 and 12. And so one thing I've realized about my own memory is that it's very, how do I say that? Fragmented.
Mm-hmm.
My childhood is very fragmented. Like, I have
Gaps.
in my memory. And so what I remember and what I know of is 9 and 12. Like, those years just stick out in my mind, and I can picture myself in the situation at the time. But yeah, so I told my mom when I was 14, but you know, I even had someone actually, so at 14, I also, like, I think it was around that same year, I had an intruder come into our home and took my underwear. So this sense of loss of safety and loss of security, just of what I had experienced previously, and then to have someone come into your home and take your underwear, like it was just another thing, right? It's so I'm illustrating this as how grief is cumulative and it's cumulatively negative. Also during that time, well, I told my mom and then nothing happened as a result. That was grief. I think there was something else, but I can't remember what it is right now. But I ended up graduating though, and I was in a relationship with someone, followed him wherever he went. And then that was a toxic relationship. That's a whole nother podcast. That's a whole nother story.
Well, it's part of your story. Give a summary of it, because you missed your father, whether it's conscious or not. You had not only the absence of a male role model who was godly and strong, but you had men harming you. Your brother was older and he was dealing with his own stuff. So it's unnaturally natural for you to follow and be clinging to someone who's another abuser of some sort. So this makes sense. And there's women and men who are listening to you now, Victoria, who totally get it. But if you can talk through it so they can maybe identify what they're doing, that'll be great. And it'll tie into what's coming, how to be free from this.
I've never shared this on an episode before, so this is a first.
Okay.
This is how messed up I felt or was, in hindsight. The boyfriend at the time, there was a pause in our relationship, or we had it was rocky anyway. He lived a little bit of ways away from me. I came to visit him, and then I had joined the military. Was that after? I'm trying to think now. Yes, I joined the military. He had already been in the military. But I went to see him because we had broken up, there was a pause in a relationship, and he ended up dating this younger girl, like much younger girl to him, his age. And then I came to see him, and I walk into his apartment and hear this girl is there. He never told me. He knew I was coming, and he told me to come so we could work on our relationship, quotations.
Mm-hmm.
And here he had this young girl there with him that he picked up. Like, it's not like she came with her car. Like, he had to go get her and bring her to his place, and then knew I was coming. It's almost like he set me up.
He did set you up.
He did
that
set
was
me
clearly up. And setting her up in a way too, where she couldn't just take off.
Right. So in his narcissistic way, it was these two girls fighting over him, right? And I made it like this mission of mine to like win him back. And I did. And it should have just ended right then and there. But I had no self-confidence, zero self-worth, did not even understand what it was I was doing to myself. It was harming myself by tolerating that. Like, I felt like I deserved that in some way. And so this is what we do when we're people pleasers and when we're seeking something that we can't find within ourselves. We seek it outside of us. Ultimately, that relationship did end after 5 years. I found the courage to, after going to hypnotherapy, found the courage to end that relationship. And I'd actually given him an ultimatum. I'm like, because at this time he had gone full-time military. And I remember calling him one time and a girl answered. And I know how the barracks and all that stuff works. They're not going to pair you with a female. I just, I knew better. I was in the military too.
Yeah.
And he's like, oh, she's on suicide watch in your room. Like, come on, you know what I mean? And so it was just another manipulation, another, it was doomed from the word go. So I ended that relationship, and then I lost my mind. That's when the drinking really got heavy. I almost lost my license. I should have lost my job. I was a train wreck, and I was going downhill pretty fast. And then I had a friend of mine. He's been a friend since high school. He moved to Wishick when I was going into my junior year, came to visit me. And, the rest is history, because he really showed me what a true gentleman was. And we had been friends for 7 years, and that's all we had been. I never looked at him as anything other than a friend. And he just knew what he wanted, and it was a relationship with me. And I resisted for quite some time because I didn't want to ruin the friendship, and I thought he was too good for me. So it took me some time to reconcile with that, but it just felt really good to feel good and to be with someone who made me feel good, who respected me, who really treated me like a queen. And yeah.
Now, let me ask you. Oh, go ahead.
We'll be married 19 years in August, and we have 3 kids.
Amen. Congratulations.
Yeah. So
let's really look at that for a second, because you were able to, through God's grace and his love and your husband's love and your own, you found love for yourself, you were able to break that cycle, which is super difficult to break. Most people, as soon as things start going good, they self-sabotage, they run. So my question was, how old was your father how old were you when your father passed away?
8.
8. And was your daddy a man that you felt that security and love from?
He was.
He was
a man's man.
So that's where you had your base of, this is what a man should be.
Mm-hmm.
And then did you see those qualities in your husband?
I saw how he treated his own mother.
Yes.
And not only that, but he brought me closer. He was the catalyst for me to have a relationship with God again, because I had written that off.
Mm-hmm.
And, I was making life decisions with this other man that I had been with. Like, he didn't want kids, so I didn't want kids. Like, I was like, he didn't go to church, so I didn't, you know what I mean? Like, it wasn't a healthy relationship for me. And I actually prayed to God. I hadn't prayed in many, many years. And I prayed that for someone, I want someone who is good for me. And then there he was.
Yeah.
And so I really reverted back to that prayer. Like, is he, when I was kind of resisting a relationship and resisting ruining, in my mind, ruining our friendship, he was just like, no, I really truly want to be with you. Like, this is why, like this, yeah, he was literally my knight in shining armor, literally, in a lot of ways. So that really changed everything for me. But it didn't cure my grief, right? It didn't take away everything that we take ourselves everywhere we go, right? So I brought that grief and trauma into our relationship. And so there were ups and downs, of course. I became, an entrepreneur, a mother. We had 3 children in 4 years. Like, what? Like if there is nothing
you definitely got along.
Yeah, well, and the thing is, he traveled a lot actually at the, for his job. We deployed actually, so we got married, and then I got deployment orders a few months later. He was just coming off a deployment, and so he volunteered to go with, because otherwise we would have been newly married and like separated.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was some red tape, but he was able to join me on deployment. But then they tried to keep us separate, which was terrible because where I was, which was different from where he was, I got my mail once a week, and I couldn't, I mean, they had a satellite phone, but you could maybe call out once a week. Like we didn't get daily phone calls, and we didn't get daily meals, hot, good hot meals like he did. And so I was in the boondocks, and he was like at Camp Snoopy, we called it. And but it really wasn't working for our marriage, like, because it took about 3 months in, 3 months in, before he could come where I was, but we were in separate platoons then, because we knew what each other was doing. We were clearing roadside bombs. That was our job in Iraq. And I was a medic, so I was leaving the wire every day. And he was, one of the guys, so he was leaving the wire every day. And we knew what each other was doing, and we couldn't talk.
Mm.
So they finally allowed us to be in the same base, but we were in different platoons. So we didn't get a lot of time alone together. And so I had entered a drawing contest, and I won.
Hey,
For the
congrats.
battalion. Yeah. Well, one of the things for that was we got a trip to Dokkan, Qatar. And so we thought, and they said, well, you can take one person. Well, duh, I'm going to bring my husband. And it just so happened to be around our 1-year anniversary, just before our 1-year anniversary. And we had an amazing time. And 3 months later, in a porta potty in Iraq, I found out I was pregnant.
Nice. Now, you didn't have any kids up to that point.
No,
And
we were newly married.
And it was a happy little accident. Were you not, just see what happens? Like,
No,
how did that?
I hadn't been on anything, and I hadn't gotten pregnant. This was before deployment. Like I went on deployment, not on anything.
Got you.
And so we actually truly thought we were going to have to see a doctor when we came back from deployment. And I was shamed.
Surprise.
Yeah. Yeah. Tell that to your battalion commander. Hey, yeah, by the way. Yeah. So a lot of shame and a lot of guilt. And that has been still one of the hardest things for me to get over. That's still something that kind of gets me today, actually, to talk about it.
Now, what do you mean by that? Because shame and guilt, you were married, it was your husband.
Yeah.
Now, we can have shame and guilt over something that's completely fake, imaginary. Satan uses lies to torment us. So was this, what were you feeling shame and guilt over? Help us understand. Because again, we appreciate you going into your pain because it helps lead us out of it.
I was shamed. We were shamed as a couple that we allowed that to happen.
Got you.
Yeah. And therefore I felt ashamed, and I should have known better. And I let my guys down, because you're leaving the wire with these same guys every single day. Those are your guys. As a medic, those are your guys, and they put their life in your hands. And we lost three men on that deployment. Like it could have happened to anybody. We had IEDs go off on our platoon, and it could have happened to anybody. And so I felt like I did let my guys down. But again, I was 3 months along before I even had a clue. I had no idea.
Mm.
And so my deployment ended early. They got me out of there. But my battalion commander said, you're going to go to Fort Carson, and you're going to have that baby there by yourself and have maternity leave. And you are not going home until after maternity leave. Well, little did he know, when I got back to Fort Carson, there was nothing he could do. I wasn't under his thumb anymore. So it took about another, by the time I actually came out and said it, and then by the time I got home, it was about a month later. So just the trauma of that, of being pregnant then, and knowing what my husband was doing. Anyway, my son, his name's Xavier, and
Nice.
Saint Francis Xavier is the patron saint of foreign missions, which I didn't realize when we named him, but he will be 17 on the 24th, on May 24th, which is my 100th episode of my podcast, Grieving Voices. So it's a big day for me.
Awesome. Congratulations. We will put a link in the show notes. So check out Victoria's podcast as well. Great content.
Circle.
Yeah. So now you are back home. You have a baby.
Yes.
Bring us forward with life. I mean, the highs, the lows, anything you feel significant, bring us through today.
Yeah.
So when did you get reunited with your husband? Did you have more kids? Were there any more? And then the most we're going to get to is, how did you heal? At what point were you able to learn to examine yourself and release, and like we discussed, let go so you could heal?
Yeah. So I think, when he came home from deployment, and then life just carried on. Like he had found a really stable job, and where that allowed me to be home with the kids. And then as my youngest we have 3 kids now, but when my youngest was 6 months old, I decided to start my own business in photography. And that was awesome. But as we all know, like being a parent and having a business, or just one or the other or both, brings up all your insecurities in all kinds of ways. And I started to see the anger starting to come out as my kids were getting older. In fact, my oldest, my son, at 3 years old, I saw him exhibit anger in a way that frightened me and made me take a step back and ask myself, whoa, where is he getting this from? I had actually, because I had my son, he was 3, and then I had his sister, she was 18 months younger than him, and then I had our youngest, who was just a baby. She was still in a car seat. So trying to get 3 kids out, all moms know this, dads, trying to get 3 kids out of the vehicle into the house when you got car seats and little ones. He wanted to ride his bike, and I said, you have to wait. And so he wasn't waiting. He was like insistent, and I had to get his sister and stuff out of the car seat. And so I thought, well, I'll do what I know to do right now in this moment so that he's not riding out on the street by himself. I locked his bike in the van. Next thing I know, his sister, like 18 months old, mommy, Xavier took a bat and hit the window. And I'm like, what? Yep. Became a Louisville Slugger at age 3 years old and broke the window on my van because he was so angry. I locked his bike in the van. And
Wow.
before I actually locked it in the van, I thought, I'm going to put it up on this really, really high shelf. Well, he started to climb, because he was walking at 10 months old, and the kid was climbing before he was walking. So I knew that would be too dangerous. So that's why I locked it in the van. Well, then, yeah, $2,000 later on a new window, I realized, he's learning it from me, because I was a ragey mom and insecure and overwhelmed. And it took me another 4 years, maybe closer even to 5, before when my youngest started kindergarten. That's when I realized I need help. I need to figure myself out. Like, I'm screwed up. Like, there's something totally wrong with me. And that's when my personal development started. I got a life coach. I was getting programs, buying programs, reading all the books, but nothing was addressing my grief. And that continued until, I was just kind of plugging along at life. And putting on a face and pretending I was fine and just trying to figure myself out, taking all the personality quizzes I could get my hands on, thinking if I understood myself better, I would know the answer. I would find the trick or whatever it was that was keeping me so stuck, not realizing it was the grief. And I even told my husband that I needed a dog. My youngest started kindergarten. I was actually at that time too, I decided to close my photography business because I felt like I was meant for more. I started to blog about my journey, spirituality and things like that. And we got a dog and we still have him. He's 8 years old and he's amazing, but I wanted to replace that loss because my identity was so wrapped up in my kids and being a mom and also being a photographer. I didn't know what to do when I lost those things. And, that's one of the myths of grief is replace the loss. And that's exactly what I was trying to do. I had another loss, actually, my father's uncle, last living sibling. And actually, none of his siblings are even alive anymore. My dad died at 44, and every single sibling of his died 70 or under. I don't even think any of them made it to age 70. And his sister just recently passed in the last year or two, in the last year, and she was in her 60s. So yeah, a lot of grief, I think, in his life growing up as well. He was a Vietnam veteran too, slept with a knife under his mattress. So I just think that a lot of what I was carrying wasn't even maybe necessarily mine, but because I was so empathic, I was just carrying a lot of stuff that, in my environment, really. But his uncle or his brother, my uncle, I found out he had brain cancer. And when my dad passed away, I also lost that entire family because they no longer were in touch with us. And I went to see him and it changed everything for me. He still remembered me and we hugged and we had 6 months to reconnect and to, I think, both of us to find healing in that relationship. And then I had another loss, a friend, and that was just a friendship that ended not by my choice. That really crushed me, brought up a lot of feelings of rejection and things. But I look back at it now and she just was not, I was trying to take something from her that she just didn't have to give. I was what you would say is an energy vampire. Again, looking for someone else to give me what I couldn't find within myself at the time. And that's when I decided or figured out I need help with my grief. And I went to Google and I found the grief recovery method and went to get trained and certified and went through the method myself. And it changed everything, changed my life. And everything I've accomplished has been because of that experience.
Now that we've just heard your story and you got to the point where you went to the grief recovery method, for those listening, what would you recommend to them as a starting point in their healing? So for the grief recovery method, what are the things you did that you saw personally work in your life and then you've seen in other people you've helped and coach?
Because it's an action-based method. So, talk therapy might work for a lot of people, but I knew I needed some sort of action. I didn't want to be on someone's couch for 3 years talking week after week. It's like, it's not like it's not a quick fix. I mean, you still have to, in the respective time, it can feel like it's a quick fix because it's one-on-one in just grief recovery is 7 weeks, once a week for 7 weeks. And people might say, you can't heal your grief in 7 weeks. And I'll say, don't knock it till you tried it. because I was 30 plus years a griever and it helped me. It worked for me. And I'm not saying it would work for everybody, but if you're open to taking action, what do you have to lose? And
Yeah.
that's what I would say.
Oh, 100%. And what are the steps to starting? Like, what are there something actionable people can take?
You really have to, first of all, it's learning new knowledge, right? So learn all you can about grief itself. And a good place to start is the Grief Recovery Handbook. It is the book that was written by the Grief Recovery Institute founder. He was a Vietnam veteran who has since passed away, but his life fell apart after he came back as a Vietnam veteran, as he had a child that died, and he was ready to end his life and just asked himself, what do I wish would have been there for me? And that's where Grief Recovery Institute and the method came to be. Over time of him working with people on the side, he was working as a contractor, and he was just talking with people and helping them work through the things that he had been experiencing, and as a man, to have other men share with you, and he was learning a lot in that process. But so it's learning new knowledge, it's challenging your own beliefs, because we learn so many of our beliefs in childhood, beliefs that are passed down to us that might not even be ours. So by questioning those beliefs, you find your own truth. Looking at your behaviors, the things that, if you're drinking, if you're using drugs, if you're shopping, gambling, looking at porn, bouncing from relationship to relationship, looking for this type of fulfillment that you can't find within yourself, just to help you to feel better for a moment. If you're using a behavior to feel better, that's what we call in grief recovery a STIRB, a short-term energy relieving behavior. And so it's recognizing those behaviors that are unhealthy, that are not serving you, and that truly are perpetuating the grief, the guilt, the shame, all of those things that keep you stuck in the pain. And taking action then of what you learn, because you can learn, someone can hand you everything of what to do. If you don't apply it, it doesn't mean anything.
Yes.
It's the application of knowledge that changes everything. And that's what grief recovery is. You learn the knowledge and then you apply it.
Yep.
And then you have the tools to use for the rest of your life. I've applied grief recovery to alcohol, money. But before that, I did my inner child, and also many relationships. And usually, and most often, the relationships that are the most painful for us are the ones with the people who are still alive. So it transformed my heart and it transformed my life and opened me up to my own potential, because I was then able to connect with who I was rather than the pain. And so grief recovery is not about forgetting or condoning or anything like that. It's really, truly about addressing the pain so that you can move forward with a new relationship with that person, if you choose to, or if they're still in your life. And yeah, look at it with a different perspective.
Now, when you did this, from when you started, how long did it take you before you started? Because you said within 7 weeks, it was a major change, but how long did it take to start feeling the relief and getting healing? Because a lot of times things get worse before they get better. In this program, is there that natural things get more intense and worse for a short term so you can have long-term gain? Or how did that work for you?
With the clients I work with and with the one-on-one program or even the group, yes, that's kind of what happens. Like you really get, I mean, we're addressing grief specifically. And even with talk therapy, how often do you address the grief specifically? So it's very laser focused, and we only address one relationship at a time. And so it is really hyper laser focused work, deep work that you're doing. So yes, it does get really uncomfortable for you to get to the other side of it. That being said, when I went for training, so going for the training, you also go through the process, but it's like drinking from a fire hose because it's not 7 weeks. It's actually 4 days.
Mm.
And we do have a 2-day program that is not for everybody, but it literally is like drinking from a fire hose. I actually got physically ill the night before, the morning of, actually. I woke up in the morning and I had it coming out both ends.
From the stress?
It was like a purge before the purge. And it was 2 days of misery, emotional, like just of really just like, imagine yourself as a child and everything that's happening to you is a rock, and you just keep adding rocks upon rocks upon rocks to your backpack. By the time you get to the age of 18 or in your early 20s, you've probably experienced a lot of grief in your life and you have a lot of rocks already. And so by the time I had gone through grief recovery and I was in my 30s, actually, I was 40. I was 40. I'd actually just turned 40. I had a lot of grief in my backpack. And so the person that went down to Austin, Texas, and the person that came home was completely different. I felt lighter than I had ever had my entire life. It was a phenomenal experience for me emotionally. And again, that's not for everybody. Like the 4-day, 2-day thing isn't for everybody, but that's why it is in 7 weeks broken down.
Now, between your birth and this journey we've gone on today to today, is there anything else significant in your life that we missed or skipped that you want to dig into?
I mean, I could add in moves. I could add in.
Well, just anything that you feel is significant, like you skipped a step in your life that really tied into the catalyst for you getting help. You said, like, God used your husband, and then you had that moment where you saw the anger in your son. So now we're at the point of healing. So you get to this grief recovery class, you take a 7-week class, and you're being taught to teach it in 4 days. Like you said, it's a fire hose. So now I just want to make sure before we get into the application for our listeners, even more on a deeper level, is there anything just about your personal life story that we missed, or are we good through today?
Well, what happened was in when my kids were, as they were getting older, but yet not addressing my grief, that's when alcohol re-entered my life. And, there's this whole like wine culture, mom wine culture, where I'm sure it makes billions of money, millions in the economy for, moms and wine, are like the perfect pair. And so alcohol was a huge thing in my life. I used it as, in a lot of ways, similar to when I used it in my early 20s, because I still was not comfortable in my own skin. I still did not feel like I could be my whole self or my true self. And yeah, I hadn't addressed the grief yet, right? So we can have these moments throughout our life that, again, this is why grief is cumulative, and it's cumulatively negative because it stacks up. It just keeps on building up and building up until we implode or we explode. My health started to deteriorate. I'm surprised I wasn't told I had fibromyalgia. At 16, I was told I had irritable bowel syndrome. So many of us are told we have these health conditions that are really manifestations of grief and trauma. And I wasn't connecting the dots. I didn't know and understand energy like I do now, actually, as an energy healer and energy worker. But I look back now with clear eyes, right? Because of what I know now. But yeah, I just was seeing I was not who I wanted to be. And I knew was not meeting my own potential. And I just wanted to be the best parent I could possibly be. And I wasn't there yet. And I knew that grief was really a big part of my picture of my life.
And then you went to this training.
Mm-hmm.
You had a huge catalyst, for 4 days. Then you come home, and what's your life look at that point? What's our slogan says exactly what you were saying. Don't just listen to great content, but do it. Repeat it each day so you can have a great life in this world and an eternity to come. So any knowledge is no good unless you apply it. So when you came back, what did applying this healing look like?
Integration was hard. That's one thing that I think I wasn't prepared for, is actually integrating then, because I still had the relationship with my mom, right? But she was still who she was. So I had this amazing experience, but yet I was coming home to that same person. And so it really is an ongoing process. And I've continued to apply the tools and knowledge that I've learned to my relationship with my mother. And the thing is she doesn't even have to know. I know she'll never listen to this podcast episode, but even if she did, I'm okay with that. Actually, I wrote a book. She's read parts of it. She didn't like it. Like, she wasn't happy about it. She told me so. And she wasn't happy that I went to be a grief recovery specialist. She knocked it down and criticized it. And, she's come around since, but I had to change. There was so much in me that, I can't change her. That's out of my hands. But I can change how I feel about her, and I can change how I approach our relationship moving forward. And we all have that power to do that. All of us. So integrating it wasn't easy, because that was the relationship I'd worked on. But as I started to work on more and more, it's like peeling back an onion. The more that I worked through, the more that I released, the more flow I felt in my life, the more intuitive I felt, and the more I was able to connect with myself. And when we are able to connect with ourselves, we're better able to connect with others. It's very much been an ongoing process. It's not like a one and done type of thing. It's ongoing.
And let's talk about that, because some people are listening and like, man, I'm already exhausted. I can't take anymore. But I know from personal experience, and from personal experience, yeah, you put more effort in short-term loss, but then you get long-term gain and benefit and peace and joy. And then, like you said, peeling back the onion, that scares a lot of people listening to it, because they don't want to put the effort in. They don't want to face their fears. But the beautiful thing is, once you face that fear, it's over. You never have to look back. You never have to feel it again. So when Victoria is telling us that she had to go through this effort and the integration took time, don't be afraid of it, but expect it and embrace it, and know that it's just part of the healing process. Is that do you agree, Victoria, or did I miss something?
No, absolutely. You got it spot on.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't think anyone, if someone would have said, well, here's this program, it's this magical pill, you're going to go home and your life is going to be amazing and perfect, I would have been like, yeah, baloney. So I'm not going to tell you that listening. It's not a magical pill, but it's magical in how it transforms you to more of who you really are.
And now we've had the privilege to speak with you, Victoria, and we've heard your story. People stuck in grief, people who hear just let go and they want to, but they don't know how. What's your advice to them right now?
You need to learn new knowledge. It's just be curious and follow that curiosity and be open. That's a big part of it too. It's like, be open. Like, I've tried that, none of that works, and this doesn't work, and that doesn't work. Well, if you haven't tried grief recovery, you don't know it doesn't work. If what you've been doing hasn't been, why would you do the same thing? It's like, what's that, Albert Einstein? You do the same thing over and over, a different result, you're not going to get it.
Yeah, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing and
Yes.
expecting different results.
Yes, I needed something different. And I know not everybody needs something different, but this method worked for me because I was so much of an internalizer. I still am. I'm very much a thinker. I'm in my head a lot as far as like how I process things and feelings. It's an internal process for me. I know there are external processors, people that where talk therapy would be a good thing for them. So I think it's really understanding how you work too as a person, like really what resonates with you. And that's why we also have group options, and that's, where we facilitate the program in a group environment where you have, and a thing is too, you have accountability, and you can't, this is where what I had to learn the hard way, thought that I could do it. And you can't heal on an island. That's why the artwork on my podcast is me on an island with a megaphone, because you often feel like you're just screaming out to the ether and waiting for someone to hear you. You just feel very isolated.
So let's do this. If you are listening to Victoria and you're hearing things resonate, Victoria, what's the best way for our audience to get in touch with you or to get in touch with the organization that you became certified in? I'll put the links in the show notes, but verbally let them know what's the best way.
Well, the resource first and foremost about grief that I would recommend is the Grief Recovery Handbook. It's on Amazon and it's also on Audible. That'll give you a lot of knowledge and information about grief. But again, it's application of knowledge. So if you're ready to apply it, or you want to really dig into your grief, or you feel like you're ready for a change in your life and to transform your life, then you can find me on theunleashedheart.com. And I have links for my podcast, Grieving Voices, on there. And you can work with me one-on-one. It's a 12-week program where you work through 2 relationships in grief recovery. And also I incorporate another program called YouMap, because after we've addressed the grief, we often feel like, well, now what? We've gotten rid of all of this baggage, and now we feel more ready to pursue something new, or we're ready to embark on a dream. Well, how do I do that? How do I make those decisions? Because your YouMap is really, truly your guide forward. And so that's why I include both programs together in my program, Do Grief Differently. And also I'm on Instagram at The Unleashed Heart. But the website, if you want to learn more about the Institute itself, is thegriefrecoverymethod.com.
Okay. thegriefrecoverymethod.com. We'll put a link to that in the show notes. So if you're listening to this on Apple, if you're listening to this on Stitcher, Spotify, Google Podcast, YouTube, just check out the show notes and you'll see the link. And if not, let me know. It means we forgot to add it.
Well, and I want to mention too, if it's important to you, that insurance are a lot of licensed therapists and social workers and things that actually go through the grief recovery method, because their training does not teach them grief. So they're there with the grief recovery method and can walk you through that process, but also take insurance. And so there's a search feature for your state. You can find a therapist that will offer that program to you through that.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you don't know this, if you're listening, we have a community that's all over the world. So this doesn't apply to many countries. Within America, though, and many countries, there's health insurance. And a lot of times they don't advertise it, but the health insurance has a mental health component. Some people are like me, though, and I don't have health insurance because it didn't make sense. So I use a co-op, and the co-op is amazing for medical issues, but it wouldn't cover any mental health issues. So you either have to pay out of your pocket, trade services with someone who you don't want to pay anybody or trade, even if it's free. If they're not qualified and they don't have results with real people, you don't want to go with them, because a counselor can make things a lot worse or they can make things a lot better. And you want to make sure you get someone who has results of helping, not just making people feel better and leading them into a ditch. But going back, there are organizations out there who will help you if you don't have the funds to pay for mental health and you don't have insurance. You do some Google research. There's a lot of people out there who will support you to help you get what you need. So I just want to throw that in, because a lot of times people who need help don't have the money to get it. And then when you do get the money, they piss it away with people who are actually scumbags or unqualified. I mean, and that's blunt. Just like anything. What do you call a doctor that graduates first in his class? Doctor. What do you call a doctor that graduates last in his class? Doctor. Same thing with attorneys, counselors, everything. Just because they went to college for it doesn't mean they're good at it. So find someone like Victoria who's experienced it, is successful at it, is good at it, and has a history of teaching others, because that's important. And that's where I was going with that, Victoria. So thank you for your patience. Now, if they want to get a hold of you, if they want to get the handbook, those links are in the show notes. And you've been super kind and patient with us and sharing your story so transparently. Thank you. Where are you today and where are you heading? So now that you've helped us, how can we help you get there?
Well, I would love to be a guest on more podcasts so I can share my message of grief, which I really want people to be able to talk about grief like we talk about the weather. I want it to become second nature for us, and I want people of the words. We don't know how to communicate about grief. And so through my guests and through my podcast, that's a lot of why I bring on the guests that I do, because I want to show people that grief isn't just about death. No one has to die necessarily for you to be grieving. There's more than 40 plus losses. And I guarantee you, if your parents divorced, if you moved, if you lost your dog, and the ripples of loss, right? Like during the pandemic, many people lost a lot of things, jobs, and then you have to move, and then you lose your neighbors, and there's always a ripple effect to grief and loss. So yeah, just if you have a podcast and you're looking for a grief expert, I would love to share more about grief on your podcast. If you are liking what you hear, you can join my newsletter. I have a bi-weekly newsletter called The Unleashed Letters, and that's on my website. I also have a free energy quiz. You can learn about your energy type and how to nurture it. Yeah, just come into my circle. Join my, I don't want to say tribe, I don't like that word, but yeah, just come in my inner circle and help me spread the word.
All right. Yeah, no, that's excellent. And I mean, you are living what you're teaching, and that's important. So between your birth and today, Victoria, is there anything we missed about your life before we wrap up this remarkable episode?
It's felt like 3 lifetimes. but I know I'm not the only one who feels that way. It really, this is why grief is so upending. It just really steals so much from us, and it really is up to us as an individual to decide that we're going to transmute that grief into something positive.
Amen. I love it. So if you need to reach out and get help, check out Victoria's website, contact her, get the Grief Recovery Handbook. If I can help you in any way, please, we love you. Contact me. Let me see if we can help, or at least connect you with someone who can in your area. But other than that, Victoria, thank you so much for being on the Remarkable People podcast today. We really appreciate you. You truly are a remarkable woman. I'm excited to hear your journey to this point, and I'm looking forward to continuing the friendship and sharing where you're at a year from now. So thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, anytime.
Enjoyed it.
Oh, thank you. And we did too. So for you, our listener, share this with the people you love. Maybe even share with the people you don't love who need it so you can love them, right? Because hurting people hurt. So let's help people heal. Let's spread the message. Let's grow together. And like our slogan says, don't just listen to great content, but do it, repeat it so you can have a great life in this world and eternity to come. So I'm David Pasqualone. This was Victoria Volk. We love you, and we'll see you in the next podcast episode. Ciao.
The Remarkable People Podcast. Check it out. The Remarkable People Podcast. Listen, do, repeat. For life.